Tchaikovsky's music, like that of no other composer, tends to get you right there.
His music is himself, and the only key is just to understand his character. I think he wrote about his life.
Tchaikovsky himself felt that the Russian people needed his music, and I believe it's still true today.
I set out to write a book on Tchaikovsky, a single volume to take 4 years. It ended as 4 volumes taking 16. I simply hadn't realized just how great a composer he was.
It's time we change our perception of Tchaikovsky from gay mad Russian on the verge of nervous breakdown and put the record straight.
Я с детства люблю музыку Чайковского. Здесь, в центре города, очень много мест связано с именем Петра Ильича Чайковского. К сожалению, близко трамвай не проходит там.
In my compositions, I appear as God created me, and as I have been made by education, circumstance, and the character of the age and the country in which I live and work. I have never once betrayed myself. As for whether I compose well or badly, let others judge.
Наш оркестр как-то больше, чем другой, наверное, оркестр связан с Чайковским. Во-первых, Чайковский дирижировал в этом зале. Что-то от души остается в этих стенах, в этом городе. Чайковский, у него есть такая смелость быть таким откровенным до конца свое сердце. Если мы будем говорить о Бетховене, Бетховен ведь не беседует лично со мной. Бетховен всегда беседует с человечеством. А Чайковский не разговаривает с человечеством, со всем человечеством. Он не хочет изменить мир. Он хочет разговаривать с каждым отдельно в зале.
This is Tchaikovsky's last home, a secluded dacha on the outskirts of Klin, about 85 kilometers from Moscow. He lived and worked here for the last 18 months of his life, when he'd become Russia's most celebrated composer, famous in Europe and America. He was an admirer of Mozart and Beethoven, but in his music trod a distinctive path of his own. This house is preserved as he left it in 1893.
I always dreamed to play on Tchaikovsky's piano. The very essence of his piano music, it's very intimate, very personal. And of course, the touch of his piano brings you closer to the soul of the composer. This piece, Barcarola, part of the cycle Seasons, it's what Russian children play when they start to play piano. It's rather close to the romances which people played at home, because music in 19th century in Russia was basically home music making. And that's probably what Tchaikovsky heard when he was a child.
Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky spent his childhood in the town of Votkinsk, 1,000 kilometers east of Moscow. His father was manager of the steelworks, one of the most important in Russia. The Tchaikovsky family lived in a grand house overlooking the reservoir in the center of town.
Родители Чайковского были очень гостеприимными людьми, и поэтому неудивительно, что этот дом очень быстро сделался центром, где собиралась вся воткинская интеллигенция. Родители Чайковского были людьми очень музыкальными, и этот дом сделался музыкальным центром интеллигенции Воткинска. Илья Петрович Чайковский очень недурно играл на флейте. Александра Андреевна очень часто пела романсы.
The family also had a large orchestrion, which was a kind of sophisticated barrel organ. It could play popular tunes from operas by Bellini and Donizetti, but perhaps most importantly of all from Mozart's Don Giovanni. And this must surely be the beginning of Tchaikovsky's lifelong adoration of Mozart.
Once, after a musical soiree, the children's French nanny noticed the effect of music on the boy.
The Tchaikovskys had guests, and a whole evening was spent in musical entertainments. Peter became so tired that he went upstairs earlier than usual. When I went to the nursery sometime later, he was weeping. "It's the music," he replied. But there was no music to be heard. "Get rid of it for me. It's here, here," said the boy, weeping and pointing to his head. "It won't give me any peace."
Сейчас мы проезжаем начало реки Фонтанки, где в училище правоведения учился Петр Ильич Чайковский.
Tchaikovsky went to the School of Jurisprudence in St. Petersburg, aged 10, and studied there for 9 years. It was a prestigious training school for the civil service. There was a strict code of discipline, beatings were common, and homosexuality widespread. As a schoolboy, he had already started writing music.
Я держу в руках самую первую сохранившуюся рукопись Чайковского. Романс «Мой гений, мой ангел, мой друг», который написал Чайковский в возрасте 17 или 18 лет. Он еще не музыканта, а только ученика училища правоведения. Он еще не знает теории музыки доскональной, поэтому почерк неуверенный. Чайковский как бы рисует ноты. Это как бы нотный текст, выдает в нем руку начинающего музыканта.
Aged 22, Tchaikovsky decided to give up his civil service career and enroll with the first students at the new Conservatoire of Music in 1862. It was established by Anton Rubinstein, a great admirer of Western European music, and was a decisive step in introducing that tradition to Russia.
It's important to remember that the Russian musical tradition was at this time still in its infancy. It had been founded almost single-handed by Glinka, a composer of brilliant imagination but largely self-taught. And what the Conservatoire brought into Russia was a Western-style professional musical education. This was what distinguished Tchaikovsky from his contemporaries like Borodin, Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov, who, like Glinka, were musical amateurs.
In 1865, Tchaikovsky got his first public performance when his characteristic dances were conducted by Johann Strauss, the great waltz king, at Pavlovsk Park near Petersburg. Strauss's concerts were expressly designed to lure people to Pavlovsk on Russia's first railway, which had been constructed in 1837.
This This music is very surprising because it doesn't sound at all like what you'd expect from a student from a conservatoire. In fact, it's almost pure Glinka. There's the orchestration, so clear and transparent. There's the constant repetition of a tune against ever-changing backgrounds, pure Glinka. Would I have recognized this as by Tchaikovsky? I don't think I would. But this style of clear, contrasted orchestration was used by him for the rest of his life.
Immediately after graduating from the Petersburg Conservatoire, Tchaikovsky was given a post teaching theory of music at the newly established Moscow Conservatoire in 1866. The Conservatoire was founded by conductor and pianist Nikolai Rubinstein, the brother of Anton Rubinstein in Petersburg. It has been known as the Tchaikovsky Conservatoire since the composer's centenary in 1940.
In 1874, after finishing his first piano concerto, Tchaikovsky came to the Conservatoire to see Nikolai Rubinstein and to play his concerto for him in order to have some advice on his piano writing. He started to play.
I played the first movement. Not a single word. Not a single comment. If only you could have known how foolish, how intolerable is the position of a man who offers his friend food he has prepared, and his friend eats it and says nothing. Say something. If only to tear it to pieces with constructive criticism, but for God's sake, just one kind word, even if not praise. I fortified my patience and played on to the end.
After long silence, Rubinstein started to criticize very strongly whole concerto. He found concerto completely worthless and proposed to Tchaikovsky change many things in concerto. Tchaikovsky opposed and told, "I will not change a note," and he left being completely angry and devastated.
With a performance from Rubinstein looking very unlikely, Tchaikovsky dedicated the concerto to the German pianist Hans von Bülow. Bülow was delighted and took the piece on his American tour and premiered it on October 25, 1875, here in Boston.
The concerto got its Russian premiere a month after Boston. Rubinstein, who'd originally called the concerto derivative, trite and vulgar, eventually changed his mind and as pianist and conductor became one of its most persuasive champions. The concerto is one of the most popular in the repertoire, thanks to the composer's lyrical gift and its predominantly cheerful mood, which is quite unusual for Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky used quite a traditional piano writing of his fellow composer of the time, like Liszt and Schumann. But what makes it really unmistakable, it's his use of the melody and his use of composition. For example, he starts with one of his unmistakable Tchaikovsky lyrical melody like that. and he started to build the tension, moving the same pattern of notes higher and higher in what we call the sequences. And higher. That's, for example, that's one of the way how he builds the tension in music. One of the things I find interesting in Tchaikovsky writing is rhythmical side of his work. For example, he constantly changed the accents. We think about Tchaikovsky as a romantic composer, but he has a modern side of his work. For example, this use of rhythm, it was something probably which explains the admiration that Stravinsky has for Tchaikovsky all his life.
I often use Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto for testing pianos because the opening chords of it are excellent to see how big the sound of the piano is. Tchaikovsky's music affects my emotions. Well, of course, we all know that emotions can be a dangerous thing. I don't think anybody will deny that we Homo sapiens have to be guided by reason. But on the other hand, sometimes there are situations when, if we are to act rightly, we need to listen to what our hearts are telling us. Who knows, maybe this is why Tchaikovsky's music is so dear to us.
I didn't know nothing about Tchaikovsky homosexuality until I came here to the Moscow Conservatoire. And even here, it was considered like kind of shameful secret. And later, knowing about all aspects of his private life, it certainly helped me to understand better the very nature of the conflict which is constantly present in his music.
So often with Tchaikovsky there is the connection between his life and his music. Tchaikovsky's brother Modest Tchaikovsky wrote in his autobiography that without recognition of Tchaikovsky's homosexuality, the music of Romeo and Juliet isn't really understandable. We know that when he was composing Romeo and Juliet, Tchaikovsky had passionate infatuation with conservatory student Eduard Zak. 14 years later, he wrote in his diary, "It seems to me that I have never loved anyone so strongly as him."
I find it interesting because I'm a gay man. I don't think it alters one's feelings and responses. I don't think it means different things are stirred within one. Genius is a universal thing. Art is beyond, though it embraces, it goes beyond sexuality.
In Russia, there was a cultural argument raging. Should they follow Western Europe, or should they look to their Slavic roots? Tchaikovsky admired the Western tradition of Beethoven, but also nodded to nationalism by occasionally using folk songs, as in the Second Symphony.
Мне кажется, что когда Чайковский хочет быть очень народным и берет материал цитаты народной музыки, мне не кажется, что это самое удачное в его музыке. этот материал музыкальный не дает возможности настоящего симфонического развития. Это бесконечное повторение этого материала без развития не становится убедительным, даже у Чайковского.
Русские музыканты отказывали Чайковскому в том, что он действительно национальный композитор. И с другой стороны, на Западе, в Европе говорили, что Чайковский слишком русский композитор и не считали его, так сказать, достойным, так сказать, европейского Олимпа. Но в том-то и дело, что природа Чайковского — это органическое соединение национальной русской природы и европейского музыкального мышления. И, в общем-то, Чайковский был гражданином мира, и его музыка принадлежит всему миру и понятна, и открыта миру.
К сожалению, трудное детство, и, в общем-то, я росла без отца, не дало возможности мне закончить музыкальное образование. Хотя музыка для меня в жизни очень много значит. Я пою в народном коллективе, это мое хобби. Пою русские народные песни. Очень часто я связываю классическую музыку с русской народной. Ну а из «Лебединого озера», конечно, больше всего я люблю танец маленьких лебедей.
It was the Bolshoi Theatre in Moscow that commissioned Swan Lake in 1875, but it was here, at the Imperial Ballet School in St. Petersburg, that Tchaikovsky did his most important work.
It's hard to believe that Swan Lake, perhaps the most famous ballet ever created, was a failure when it's first produced in Moscow. But what has surprised me, that is critics who at that time wrote that Tchaikovsky's music is monotonous and boring. For me as a ballerina, it's just the opposite. His music is sublime, it's fulfilling, and serene, and everything. To dance to Tchaikovsky music is like breathing. For example, in Swan Lake, just listening to the music, I can imagine how to dance, and somehow body must sing.
Пяточки вперед, плечики вниз, желудки проглотили, все подтянули.
Swan Lake only triumphed when it was re-choreographed after Tchaikovsky's death by Marius Petipa and Liev Ivanov. Tchaikovsky's work with Petipa had transformed ballet from a decorative art to an expressive and dramatic one.
The first collaboration between Tchaikovsky and Marius Petipa was ballet The Sleeping Beauty. And it was very happy and unusual collaboration because it was an equal partnership. At that time, the ballet master, the choreographer, had complete authority. His word was law, and ballet composers were like musical servants. Tchaikovsky remember his failure in Moscow, in Swan Lake, and for this time he required very detailed instructions from Petipa, right down to the number of bars for solo or pas de deux. And Petipa, for the first time, he's really willing to adjust his ideas, to accommodate Tchaikovsky. And the result was a masterpiece.
In Tchaikovsky's time, it was the Imperial Theatre, the Mariinsky, more recently known as the Kirov, that commissioned ballet and opera performances. And Tchaikovsky wrote a great deal for the stage, 3 ballets and 10 operas.
Направо от нас Мариинский театр. Здесь произошло мое знакомство с Петром Ильичем Чайковским. Здесь замечательные спектакли проводятся. «Лебединое озеро», «Иоланта», Евгений Онегин. Это счастье попасть в такой большой красивый театр.
It's important for us to remember that 5 of his operas, as well as Sleeping Beauty, great ballet score, were premiered on this stage of Mariinsky Theatre.
Значит, после этого дашь мне 40.
Tchaikovsky's most popular opera, in his lifetime and since, is Yevgeny Onegin. It was composed when Tchaikovsky was 37 and premiered in Moscow by students of the Conservatoire.
It's about young people and their passion. And I find Onegin, of course, endlessly beautiful, dramatic, lyrical scenes rather than grand opera.
Yevgeny Onegin is based on a poem by Alexander Pushkin, one of the classics of Russian literature. Tatiana, a young girl in the provinces, is overwhelmed by Onegin visiting from Petersburg and confesses her love for him in a letter. He rejects her.
I so thoroughly identified myself with the image of Tatiana that she became for me a living person. I loved Tatiana and was furiously indignant with Onegin, who seemed a cold, heartless fop.
That central phrase of Tatiana's, was to become a very special fate motif running not only through this opera, but through Tchaikovsky's later music. Sometimes it's simply a 6-note descending contour around which new fate themes are built, but at other times Tchaikovsky uses it explicitly. For instance, Lenski, another of the main characters of the opera, quarrels with Onegin, challenges him to a duel, and is killed. So how does Tchaikovsky open the aria he gives Lenski just before he meets his fate? Well, he takes Tatiana's phrase, turns it into the minor key, and with a little twist at the end, makes it Lenski's opening phrase.
In 1877, 2 women came into Tchaikovsky's life. First, he got a letter from a wealthy widow, Nadezhda von Meck. She had been overwhelmed by hearing his music and requested a photograph.
I want to search your face for clues as to those sources of inspiration, those feelings which inspire you to compose music, which transports me into a realm of sensations, aspirations, and desires that life itself can never satisfy. There was a time when I was desperate to meet you. But now, the more enamored I become of you, the more acquaintanceship frightens me. In short, I prefer to think of you from a distance, to hear you in your music, and to feel at one with you in your work.
Tchaikovsky and von Meck never met, but kept up an intensely personal correspondence in 1,200 letters over 13 years. She rescued him from financial difficulties with a yearly stipend, which meant he could give up teaching and concentrate on composition. The other woman, Antonina Milyukova, a former student at the Conservatoire, wrote Tchaikovsky a letter confessing her love. Surprisingly, aged 37, Tchaikovsky decided to get married.
I think two reasons decided Tchaikovsky to marry. First, he knew that rumours about his homosexuality were circulating. But second, he felt guilty about his homosexuality, but believed that if he married, then he could defeat it. And so when the bridal victim offered herself, he decided this was the perfect way out.
Чайковский не хотел привлекать широкого внимания к факту своей женитьбы.
Слава тебе, Боже наш, слава тебе!
Кроме священника, в церкви со стороны жениха присутствовали лишь его младший брат Анатолий и молодой скрипач Котек, любимый ученик Чайковского и предмет его глубокой душевной привязанности.
Венчается раб Божий Петр, рабе Божией Антонине, во имя Отца и Сына и Святаго Духа. Аминь.
As soon as the ceremony was over, as soon as I found myself alone with my wife, and realized that it was now our fate to live with each other inseparably, I suddenly felt not only that she did not inspire me with even a simple feeling of friendship, but that she was hateful to me in the fullest sense of that word.
For their brief honeymoon, Tchaikovsky and Antonina took the train to St. Petersburg, but things never improved. He referred to her as the reptile. The couple separated after 3 months, and even during that period spent barely 4 weeks together. Ironically, though, the effect of this emotional turmoil was one of the richest creative periods in Tchaikovsky's life.
Even if we didn't have Tchaikovsky's own testimony that that opening theme represents fate, we might have guessed it from its ending. A descending scale, which in Tchaikovsky's music so often represents this fateful force which he believed controlled his whole destiny.
Tchaikovsky dedicated his 4th symphony to Nadezhda von Meck, whom he called my best friend, and confessed that much of it was autobiographical, coming out of the depression he had endured.
Хорошо, хорошо, хорошо. Но только играть как в форшлаге. Не парам-парам-парам-парам, нет, парам-парам-парам-парам-парам. Так. У Сибелиуса есть грустный вальс, называется, да? У Чайковского есть вот это. Это вальс о том, что было. О том, что он с сожалением вспоминает. Парам, 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 парам.
I should not wish symphonic works to come from my pen which express nothing, and which consist of empty playing with chords, rhythms, and modulations. Should a symphony not express those things for which there are not words, but which need to be expressed?
Чайковский, для него очень характерно пользоваться в тревожных эпизодах или в предчувствии каких-то катаклизмах. Пользоваться иногда не очень красиво звучащим инструментом. Например, очень низкий гобой. Причем Чайковский пишет пианиссимо. Хотя прекрасно знает, что гобой пианиссимо это сыграть не может никогда. И это будет звучать и не очень приятно, нужно сказать. Но в этой неприятности есть ощущение тревоги, предстоящей катастрофы.
Tchaikovsky was simply well educated in orchestration. He learned a lot from Beethoven, But he also learned a lot from Mozart. His clear timbres. Woodwinds playing with the woodwinds. Strings playing with the strings. Rhythm percussions. And after that, combined, you have melody, strings, harmony, winds. It's very, very simple. I have to say, some critics will say, Tchaikovsky, well, it's not such a serious composer. Well, of course, it's popular, but it's not first-hand, it's not first class. I can only say, when there will be one critic who will become as big as Tchaikovsky, I will continue the discussion.
After the fiasco of his marriage, Tchaikovsky spent 6 months abroad, where he finished his violin concerto in 1878. Like many of Tchaikovsky's works, the concerto got off to a bad start with an appalling review in Vienna, but has since become one of his most popular pieces.
Sometimes when I play Tchaikovsky music, I feel that I'm becoming part of it. I'm becoming part of the music, part of his life, that I'm suffering together with him. I love life the way he loves it. And this is also one of the greatest things one must understand, that one must try to be a good artist to perform Tchaikovsky music. To try and feel what he felt. This is what makes his music so special.
The concerto was dedicated to the Hungarian virtuoso Leopold Auer, who declared it unplayable. But it was inspired by the 23-year-old violinist Józef Kotek, who had been present at Tchaikovsky's wedding.
He writes a lot about love, because that was one of his tragedies. And that's what he could do very well, writes about love. And everywhere, almost in every piece, he writes about it, and one can feel it. And this is amazing, what sort of feeling he has for music.
I always liked him, and have several times fallen in love with him a little. When for hours I hold his hand in mine, passion rages in me with unimaginable strength. My voice trembles like a youth, and I say something nonsensical. However, I am far from wanting physical relations. We spoke about the concerto he's ordered from me, and he repeated that he'd get angry if I didn't write it.
Tchaikovsky himself admitted that after the Fourth Symphony, something new has opened in his heart. And violinists are very lucky that the concerto was written in his best time. I think he did something very new and quite revolutionary. He used everything. He used fantastic resources of the violin. I don't think he's missed any note on the fingerboard. This was that may be why it also created so many problems for the violinist at his time.
Tchaikovsky was totally in love with Mozart, but also the score of Carmen. The brilliant ability of Georges Bizet to put drama and music so well together. Hardly they knew about Bizet in Russia. Tchaikovsky was already modeling for himself Carmen. So finally he was able to achieve what his, let's say, masters, big masters for him, achieved before him. It was Queen of Spades, picked down. It's ideal, dramatically, and it is great to know that it happened here, on this stage, in the Mariinsky Theater.
By the time he got to writing Queen of Spades, Tchaikovsky was able, I think, to identify much more particularly the nature of the real emotions involved in his life. And that's what leads to the creation of the extraordinary figure of German, a fascinating, daring, bold creation of a lonely, driven man. What he confesses to his friend, to Tomsky, is this extraordinary, wildly driven, passionate love for a woman whose name he doesn't know, and as he says in this aria, whose name he doesn't even want to know. He's terrified that by naming it, this unnamed passion, that the danger will lead to his own destruction. It's a very small step from thinking like that to understanding this to be identified with his own homosexuality and with his own coming to terms with that burden, I think it would be for him, and with how to find a fulfillment to that. But that's why I think that emotionally it's so much more searing, darker, but infinitely more personal than the creation of Tatiana, which next to German I think is a conventional and romanticized figure next to a dark, acute, almost Dostoevskian portrait.
A little-known piece full of Dostoevskian passion is the symphonic ballad The Voyevoda. It's linked to one of the most devastating blows of Tchaikovsky's life. In 1890, he suddenly received a letter from Nadezhda von Meck telling him of financial difficulties and, most hurtful, that she wanted their correspondence to end.
Tchaikovsky had begun the Voyevoda about a week before he heard from von Meck, and progress had been slow. But after the shock of her letter, he sketched it in only 12 days. The Voyevoda is based upon a ballad by Pushkin about a man betrayed by his wife. And I find it hard not to hear in some of this music the effect upon Tchaikovsky himself of this betrayal by his most beloved and most trusted friend. It's some of the most ferocious and dissonant music he ever wrote.
In fact, the financial implications of von Meck ending her allowance weren't so devastating for Tchaikovsky. By now, he was an internationally successful composer, conducting his works on tour. In 1891, at 50 years old, he made his most prestigious tour, to America.
Peter Kitsch Tchaikovsky is how one newspaper printed his full unpronounceable name. But Tchaikovsky was honored in America as a celebrity. He was dubbed the Tsar of Composers, unquestioned genius, master of modern orchestra. He was overwhelmed by the attention from the press.
He intends to spend a year in America, and his time will be occupied.
Who was invited to visit the United States by Andrew Carnegie, spent the first day in New York principally outside of the representative Russian composer living today, sharing with Brahms and Saint-Saëns the honors of European fame. It will be the first time in America's musical history that a Russian composer will wield the baton.
Tchaikovsky spent 25 days in America. He visited the Niagara Falls, went to Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Philadelphia. But the reason he came was to conduct his music at the opening festival of New York Carnegie Hall.
Everyone here pampers, honors, and entertains me. It turns out that I'm 10 times better known in America than in Europe. Works of mine that are still unknown in Moscow are performed here several times a season. I'm far more a big shot here than in Russia. Is it not curious?
Tchaikovsky may be one of the most popular of composers, but he was not especially innovative in musical history. All the same, his achievement in ballet music was hugely influential on Stravinsky. Tchaikovsky's last symphony, the Pathétique, is the supreme example of cathartic melancholy combined with a revolutionary structure. The emotional power of his work influenced Puccini, and the structural innovation, particularly ending with a powerful slow movement, was taken up by Mahler. Tchaikovsky dedicated the symphony to his nephew Bob Davidov, to whom Tchaikovsky had become a sort of father figure. He confessed publicly that the symphony had a specific subject, but wouldn't reveal it. Let them guess, he said.
I shan't be at all surprised if this symphony is misunderstood or torn to shreds. It won't be the first time. But I definitely consider it the best, and in particular the most sincere of all my works. I love it, as I have never loved any other of my musical creations.
The Pathétique is the most original symphony in the 70-plus years since Beethoven's Ninth. Tchaikovsky seems to rethink the whole nature of what a symphony might be. And its expression is so intense, so filled with pain, turmoil, and a very bitter irony. I simply cannot believe it's not a personal document setting out a profoundly tragic experience, and one which, as Tchaikovsky himself would have said, only music can express.
Рукопись шестой симфонии – важнейший документ, потому что именно на этих страницах как бы запечатлен дух композитора. Запись стремительная. Карандаш, кстати, Чайковский всегда писал мягким карандашом, поэтому его записи – это портрет композитора. Запись идет легко, карандаш легкий. Вот что-то мысль споткнулась, сразу карандаш темнеет, потому что он врезается в бумагу. И вот наступает в музыке решительный момент, который мы сейчас знаем с этим страшным ударом литавр. Это такое напряженное, страшное место, а Чайковский выписывает его легко, потому что оно уже звучало. Этот слом, этот срыв, этот важнейший драматургический момент для Чайковского был ясен заранее.
Эту симфонию очень часто играют как очень такую сопливую, слезливую музыку. Мне кажется, что Чайковский приводит героя к концу страшному, так достойно. Он знает неизбежность, да. Он знает неизбежность вот этого конца. Вы вдруг услышите у тромбонов цитату молитвы, отпевания со святыми упокой.
Tchaikovsky died, aged 53, on November the 6th, 1893, only 9 days after he'd conducted the premiere of the Pathetique Symphony in the Philharmonic Hall. His funeral in the Kazan Cathedral was one of the biggest St. Petersburg had seen. But even before it had taken place, rumors about his death had started circulating.
Есть две точки зрения. Одна официальная и общеизвестная о том, что он умер от холеры. А вторая – то, что он покончил самоубийством. Я придерживаюсь второй точки зрения. Почему? Потому что существующие материалы настолько противоречивы, и так они ложно освещают события, не сходятся свидетельства и показания людей, которые присутствовали при его кончине. Они не сходятся.
Tchaikovsky died in the apartment of his brother, Modeste, in St. Petersburg, after an illness lasting 4 days. The suicide story maintains that Tchaikovsky was summoned to a court of honor by former pupils of the School of Jurisprudence. To prevent the breaking of a homosexual scandal, Tchaikovsky was told to poison himself. Surely, they claim, his infectious body could not have been displayed in an open coffin if he'd died of cholera. The official version has the composer drinking a glass of infected water, and its supporters maintain the contradictions around Tchaikovsky's death are exaggerated.
It was well known at this time about Tchaikovsky's homosexuality, and so many people from a school of jurisprudence had the same inclinations in Tchaikovsky. It would be meaningless to try Tchaikovsky on a so-called court of honor.
Я должен сознаться, что начинал свою исследовательскую деятельность почти 100% уверенным в том, что Чайковский покончил жизнь самоубийством. Но Чайковский умер, как показывают свидетельства и близких, и документы, от последствий холеры. В данном случае это была уремия, задержка мочи в организме. Поэтому нахождение тела Чайковского в открытом гробу не может вызывать удивления, поскольку холера была побеждена 3 днями раньше.
However Tchaikovsky died, it doesn't change the music. In the slow finale of the Pathétique, Tchaikovsky adds his own musical enigma in the way he scores the main theme. It is heard, but not played.
Значит так, мы играем сначала только первые скрипочки, начало. Да. Написано так, да? Да. Никто не догадается, что это 6-я симфония начала, правда? Или, например, вторые скрипки играют. Вот это вы видите, когда смотрите партитуру, а то, что вы слышите, совсем другое. Вместе вы услышите эту мелодию.
When this melody returns later in the movement, it is played directly, not divided up between the violins. It's as if by this stage, fate is unavoidable. There's no point in denying even to himself the presence of that descending motif.
Даже не задумываясь, он построил мелодию таким образом, что она как бы сходит в могилу. Мелодия у него идет сверху вниз, что, в общем, очень важно, наверное, потому что вообще в старину, когда оповещали о смерти кого-либо, тогда колокола били с высокой нотой, ниже, ниже. Это означало, кому-то передавали трагическую новость. И вся симфония, она так и сконструирована. Вниз.
Музыка Чайковского мне помогает в жизни, не знает ни границ, ни пределов. Музыка лечит людей, это бесспорно. Во всяком случае, мне она помогает лучше всяких таблеток.